Welcome everyone to the November iteration of Cross Pollinations. This week's event, we will be talking about brain health. And my name is Mick. I co-coordinate this series. For those who are new here, welcome to Cross Pollinations. It is a monthly virtual Health Humanities series that brings poets and health workers together in conversation around different themes. I'm joining tonight from Takaranto, the unceded lands and continued home of many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And in Mohawk, Takaranto means where there are trees standing in the water.
And my name is Rhiannon. I'm the other half of the Cross Pollinations coordination team. I'm joining this evening from Jajage, also known as Montreal. And in Ganyageha, the name Jajage means the place where rivers unite and divide, which I always say is very appropriate for this evening as we come together in conversation. And this evening's event is going to be on the theme of, as Mick mentioned, neurology and brain illness. And we're really excited about this theme and also thrilled to be joined by the wonderful poet, Jim Johnstone, and also by artist, curator, and researcher, Marilène Oliver. So without further ado, Jim Johnstone is a Toronto-based poet, editor, and critic. He's published 7 collections of poetry, most recently The King of Terrors, Coach House Books 2023, and is also the author of The Bait and Switch, Essays, Reviews, Conversations, and Views on Canadian Poetry, The Porcupine's Quill 2024, and the author of Write, Print, Fold, and Staple on Poetry and Micropress in Canada, which was published by Gaspereau Press in 2023. Jim holds an MSc from the University of Toronto and founded the Anstruther Books imprint at Palimpsest Press. So I will hand it off to Jim.
Thanks so much, Rhiannon. I appreciate the introduction, and it's lovely to see everyone in the chat room here and participating online tonight. Thank you so much for coming. So I'm actually going to start by reading a short preface from my latest book of essays, Bait and Switch, which describes being diagnosed with a brain tumor early in the pandemic. I think this will be a good preface for my reading from The King of Terrors. The call came when I was sitting in bed, editing. It was the first summer of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the air conditioning was out, turning my apartment into something of a makeshift greenhouse. Unknown number flashed on my phone, and I straightened, sweating as I answered. On the other end, the specialist who'd recently ordered an MRI of my head and neck spoke carefully, the way I'd heard actors playing doctors speak when delivering bad news on TV. Despite a practiced kind of empathy you might hear on Grey's Anatomy, I was still startled when the ENT got to the word brain tumor. A new anxiety rose in my chest, and sometime later I found myself walking into the next room in a daze to find my wife. I can't remember taking a breath. I'd written down the official diagnosis, a meningioma in my left frontal lobe. Taking to Google immediately after I received the call, my wife and I learned that the odds of survival were good, an 87% chance to live the next 5 years. This was different than what we'd expected, though. At 41 years old, I was living life as if my odds were 100%. That first phone call was positive. The tumor was small and only required monitoring. Most meningiomas grow slowly, so there was a chance that I would live a full life without needing medical intervention. Mentally, I felt good and imagined the diagnosis as a dream that might resolve itself once I awoke. My physical symptoms told me otherwise. There were times when I was unsteady walking down the street, something I'd initially attributed to aging. Worse, I was plagued with headaches, particularly at night, which knifed through my left eye. I'd often get up in the early morning hours, run a sink full of cold water, and dunk my head, a calming technique passed on by a poet friend, so that I could relax enough to sleep. So this essay goes on to describe how I would eventually need surgery to have the meningioma removed when it grew to be about the size of a tennis ball. And so I'm going to read some poems now from The King of Terrors, which was published in 2023. And you can see the silver brain on the cover here in the light. And the first poem I'm going to read is a poem that's really rooted in emotion. It was about how I felt about the diagnosis. I traveled up to Anstruther Lake, which is a lake in the Kawarthas that I named my small press after. And I wrote this poem, which is addressed to my future ghost. And that's the name of the poem, Future Ghost. Last night, the lake rose to meet me as I crossed. Anstruther was dark, and the trees on the other side stretched toward but didn't touch my boat, as if their branches were made of glass. Do you remember? I wasn't alone. I'm never alone with my wife, who promised to stay forever and has, longer than anyone I've known. You've known me my whole life, yet I'm not sure I'd like to meet you. I ask if you see me, see everything I do and continue to do, then why do I feel the need to explain myself? Look here. The lake is a door. Last night, my wife's hand stretched down to hold me as I swam, her phone lighting the water with its camera. The lake was glass. The trees, their branches, fingers still attached. I ask, are you able to forgive? If I can confess, then I'm sorry I've taken 40 years to learn how to treat others kindly. Kindness? I'm still unsure. And yet I move forward, touching everything in my path. Tradition, proof, the waves where I'm unreasonable but determined to rationalize my space in the world. The place where Rathbun flows into Anstruther's mouth. Rathbun, where we stomped to the forest's living will. Traditionally, we've eaten what we found braided at its edge. Braided swam. I'm not ready for this to end. I don't own my wife, the water, the eyelashes of the trees. I don't own my own body. Forever unsafe and as comfortable as a second home. Understudy. Lifeguard pretending to rush down from a steel mezzanine. Over and over you watch by the light of a missed call. This is the first time I've talked back, but what am I supposed to do? Keep changing? Obituary with added details, only to look back and see everything I've done wrong? I've done everything I've been accused of doing. Held others underwater until they could see the future. Held my breath underwater until I noticed I've become proof of social change. Anstruther is dark, and my wife is stretched toward but doesn't touch my body as if it will hurt her skin. Knife in. I'm not ready to leave, not ready to leave, ready to leave. Let's light the lake below. Take a picture to fill a screen. Set it as a second home. So the next poem I'm going to read is directly related to my diagnosis and to the brain tumor itself. It actually has a visual component that I'm going to show you here that relates to the cover of the book, actually. So you can see the source poem has been carved out of a brain with an occluding meningioma. So I'm going to read three parts of this, the non-visual parts. Two of them are erasure on a central text that I'm going to read in the middle, and it's called Slice Selective Excitation, Brain Scan Machines, because I had to go for a lot of sounds a lot like going to a dance party. the noises, it's almost like techno. You have to wear earphones so that so because it's quite not noisy in the machine. So this is slice selective excitation. 1. I apologize for the times I'm not myself. 3. Uncontrolled spread, uncontrolled touch. The tumor proxy for the mind itself. Mind yourself while entering the MRI wing. Skeleton, uncontrolled beats slicing through headphones, through capillaries, a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. No eye, every cell replaced. White dwarf, whiteout applied to the left frontal lobe, interstitial space. I feel pain knife down my cheek, the tumor a penny dropped from a great height. There's no other way to apologize. Silo what hurts. No, there's more to motherlessness than what's being nurtured beneath my skull. A planet pressing down, as far as anyone can tell. Lingual, palate-based, how to pronounce this wilderness. Obit, orbit, eye line forested, foreign body lodged in the body, what needs cutting out. Bad lighting, can't see in without an MRI. Slice thin enough to notice tree rings, growth, slow going, but there and there until there's an opening. Contrast enhanced, lopsided, so big I'm going to fall over. Say that as many times as possible. Say it before a neuron fires. Does the impulse serve as warning? Tongue-tied, the answer comes out slurred. Everything in the body is a copy. Skin, hair, teeth. Learning is possible, almost primal. We talk late into the night, the tumor out of mind, but expanding. Once each thought is thought, they're arranged into the freedom to choose, the freedom to voice loss. Met halfway to the summit by an interventionalist god. The tumor piles up like snow, asking, "Are you awake yet?" I'm looking down like ash spit from the mouth of a volcano. A slow rain covering the slopes unnoticed, beyond what's been forecast. Uncontrolled spread, my identity, myself. 5. Every cell hurts, lopsided, tongue-tied, volcanic. So these poems were written during the pandemic. So my illness, I really considered an illness at a time of illness. And in Toronto, you really couldn't escape the pandemic. And when I would go to the hospital for appointments, you had to be heavily masked. And so there are a few pandemic poems in this book. And this is a poem about fear called The King of Terrors. It's the title poem of the book. First, there was fear. Fear of being shut in, a continent of shut-ins, shut up. Fear without breath. Fear of continental drift, the advance of the recently landed. Fear hovering between two ways. Body, the body bag, body zipped and dragged from home. Fear leading by example. Fear untouched, unchanged. Fear darkening the forest in each lung, expanding into pleural cavities. Fear passed from hand to hand. Fear as king, as crown, as the rush to subsume the twilight of the valleys. Fear become first and last. Fear looking wildly between animals to determine the origins of disease. Fear running free. Self-portrait as statistical life expectancy. The statistics say this is a waiting room. Expectation measured in beats per minute, those not afraid to die. The statistics say this is an answering machine. Red light, the intersection between age and agency, a primer for what comes next. The rush to immunity, reported rates of infection and spread. When they become one and the same, hit start to resurrect. So I'm going to read the last poem that I wrote for the book, which is the last poem I wrote before having surgery, actually. It's a poem in parts. So I'm just going to pause between each part in the poem as I go. And this is called There is Nothing More Invasive Than Snow. There is nothing more invasive than snow falling in a temple. A tumor lodged so that what's witnessed is memory, second tense, a separate mind. I'm mindful to claim this gift without unwrapping it. Life as death, sentence, a scaffold where pain steadies until its blade slices down. Tent pole, brain bound. Lift my skull away from the pulse that animates the table, away from the scalpel and the bed of narcissus beneath my brow. Lift my skull away from skin, up and out like Yorick palmed, judged and placed on watch where ragged claws push in. The meningioma's weight, familiar though hidden, is an affirmation, a form of will. This rapture, this silence while asleep, now reason, brought forth unto, no. I'm not scared. I've heard talk of my condition before. The times my father would say, it's not brain surgery, son, meaning this isn't life or death, and you have years before you'll count backward from 30. Fight but fall under the spell, headache of sleep, snow's all-encompassing grip. Can you get up, walk straight, close your eyes and lift your arms above your head? Or, headache, has the tumor grown? A heavenly body, maybe the sun straining until it swallows the sky? Headache, pins down the father, the expectation that what's been created will remain as it was created, in working order, a machine. The gift is a season. Snow in summer, steps of the cerebral cortex cooled, rewired, rewound until I resurrect in your gaze. Look at me. Look away. Take the stones from my pockets and suspend me head first. And on the table, I'll be given a choice to finish, noun and verb, or return. Snowfall brushing away the past, the present, these words. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jim. That was such an incredible reading. Thank you so much for that reading and for sharing about your experience with brain cancer. If anyone has any comments or questions for Jim or Marilène, feel free to put those into the chat. We'll have a discussion period with our last bit of time at the end. Wow, amazing. So now I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Marilène Oliver, who works at the crossroad between new digital technologies, traditional print, and sculpture, her finished objects bridging the virtual and the real worlds. Oliver uses various scanning technologies such as MRI and CT to reclaim the interior of the body and create artworks that allow us to contemplate our increasingly digitalized selves. Oliver has created several artworks using scans of brains and on the subject of caring for her mother who had Lewy body dementia. With Professor Simonita Scipione, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, Oliver curated the exhibition Connections Bringing Neuroscience and Art Together, which opens at the Royal Alberta Museum in Edmonton, Alberta on the 21st of November 2024. Marilène Oliver is an associate professor of printmaking and media arts at the University of Alberta, Canada. Oliver has exhibited internationally in both private and public galleries, including the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Wellcome Trust, Mass MoCA, Knoxville Museum of Art, Brazarius Museum in Greece, Casino Luxembourg, Fundicio Sorg, the Glenbow Museum, and her work is held in several private collections around the world, as well as a number of public collections, such as the Wellcome Trust, Victoria and Albert Museum, and Knoxville Museum of Art. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. And I echo that was an incredibly powerful presentation, Jim, and I'm quite moved, so I'll try and recover. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm in Switchy-Saigon, which in Cree means Beaver Hills House, Treaty 6 territory. So traditional lands of the Cree, Métis, Dene, Anishinaabe, Nakota Sioux, and Iroquois, and many other ancestral nations. So I'm just going to start sharing, if that's okay. King Jim, there was a piece I just had to add in. And you just saw a glimpse of it. There's a lot of resonances, I think, between what you were saying and some of the work that I've been doing. So I'm really interested for the discussion afterwards. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, just to say that as an artist, I work with medical imaging data, and I have done for like 20 years. So I'm just going to show a couple of my very early pieces, just kind of like show you where I'm coming from and maybe how life and what life delivers to us kind of can change the direction of our work. So when I was actually just graduating from my MFA program in London, I became very interested in the digitized body. It was part of it was like a seminar that I did was about the uncanny body. And I was really interested at that time in how we were becoming more and more, our communication was being increasingly mediated by technology. And in my research, I came across the Visible Human Project. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but you've probably seen it, not realizing. But it was a medical project that where the goal was to make a virtual atlas of a human body. And at that time, the team that won, they proposed to find a specimen on death row, Joseph Paul Jernigan, and he was then donated his body to medical science. Once he died, they froze his body, sliced it very finely, photographed it at a very high resolution, and uploaded it to the internet. And I was so kind of like taken by this idea and shocked by this kind of concept of a human becoming data that I downloaded all the cross sections, screen printed them onto sheets of plexiglass, stacked them, and then created these sculpture, like relocating him in time and space. And that project really set me on this journey, which now has been going on for like almost 3 decades of investigating medical data, just because it's changed so much and it keeps on changing and keeps expanding and is increasingly, as we heard in Jim's work, so integral to the way our lives and the way we know ourselves, and especially at the most vulnerable times. So this is one of the first works I made where really like the technology and the familial come together. So this is a family portrait. So this was made directly after I Know You Inside Out, the one from the Visible Human Project. And this was like 20 years ago, and I just wrote letters to radiographers and said, please, can you scan my family? And 2 universities said yes. So I worked with the University of Nottingham, and they scanned so on my far left there is my father, then it's my mum, then it's me, and there's my sister. So we have a family portrait in sculptural form. And then seeing a detail here, it's kind of like an optical illusion. When you look straight through the sculptures, it's completely transparent. You see straight through it, but at an angle, they kind of volume out. It becomes like a volumetric rendering of the body, and they're very kind of ghostly. It was a really exciting, it still is a very exciting material to work with. I consider like medical data as like a material and subject. And in the first sort of 5-6 years after making Family Portrait, I worked a lot with MRI scan data, where I was really kind of, with MRI, what happens is that you have the scan, and then you only get the scans that you requested at the time that you were scanned. For example, say the radiographer will say, okay, I want a scan every 10 millimeters, and then that's what you've got. So I kind of explored that as much as I could. CT scanning, which is quite different. It's a much faster scan. It's very high resolution, and then it's post process. So you can kind of cut it up and slice it afterwards in any kind of direction or orientation that you want, and you can apply all these different kind of color settings to it. So I kind of explored the data in that way, very much like a process kind of work, and really thinking and then exporting it in different ways, thinking about the materiality and what that means to the final kind of sculptural object. So on the left-hand side, for example, this is a piece that's etched out of copper. It's a life-size piece. And then you see, like, for example, you were talking about like surgery, Jim. This kind of in the one in the middle there that looks like it's made of burnt wood. This was kind of actually inspired by my mother-in-law, who had intestinal cancer, and like the surgery that was proposed in order to kind of save her, and what do we need to excavate in order to survive. And so I'd worked with, I'd say, medical imaging for maybe 15 or 16 years. And then my mother she was diagnosed with Parkinson's when she was about 57, 58. But we soon realized that maybe it wasn't Parkinson's, there was something else happening. And then she got this diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. I don't know if people know of Lewy body dementia, but it's kind of a bit like a combination of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and just as a much faster progression. But like having worked with MRI and CT and being very familiar with it, it was only when I really saw these scans that I felt the shock of what it could do to your life. It was also at the time that my mum was she didn't really remember who I was. She kind of felt she trusted me, but she couldn't specify who I was. She kind of forgotten me in that way. And so to see these beautiful scans that were confirming the diagnosis of Lewy body dementia with these sort of beautiful colors, but at a time when she couldn't remember me, was like very powerful, and I say completely kind of our lives were never the same after this moment. And at the time I was doing actually an MSc in medical imaging, because I got to a point where I felt I really needed to understand the science better so that I could have better understanding and work with it in a deeper way. And I'd been doing a project on like fluorescence and tagging, so tracing things in the body to be able to give diagnosis. And in my sketchbook, I'd been doing these sort of dots of information and then highlighting them or tagging them with fluorescent markers. And completely by accident, I spilt my water bottle in my bag, and it caused some sort of the information or the black dot to leak out. So like what was information anymore, but it's just what was left was tagging. And it inspired me to make this artwork where I printed out the MRI scan of my mother's brain on very cheap printing paper. And then I soaked my body in water and then laid on the scan so that it made the ink blur. And then I outlined the trace of my body with those markers to sort of, rather than it be the dementia that was highlighted, it was kind of some way, kind of a trace of me in her brain. And then when you can see it in black light, that it is a kind of like a fluorescent marker. So not too long after this time, my mother's illness had progressed to a point where we were told that there was no more drugs that she could be given, and that we should think about more yoga and massage and meditation. At the same time, I was really because it was quite her illness was quite visible. She had trouble walking and talking and kind of just doing normal things. And I remember thinking people would kind of always kind of like stop looking at her, kind of be embarrassed around her. And so I wanted to make some sculptures that really celebrated the beauty of her and her illness, and the kind of the love that the care that kind of emerged from her illness. So I made this series of sculptures where the body kind of opened in order to reveal the beauty of its diagnosis of these highlighted areas. So and to also do these yoga poses, as we'd been recommended that my mum should do more yoga. So here it's called forward fold, and you can see that kind of these highlighted spectacular areas are highlighted and celebrated. And then this piece, which I showed you before, which was with the etched copper, here she's kind of like stretching out her legs and then revealing this fluorescent interior, which is part of the etching process. In order to protect the copper, you use some spray paint, and I use fluorescent spray paint to protect the copper on the rear side, but in black light, it really flows. It really glows, sorry. And so not too long after this, my mother died. Actually 7 years tomorrow that she passed away. And in the sort of the months after she died, I remember in the morning kind of waking, when I would wake up, it was almost as if she was kind of right there. It was the first thing I thought about. She was kind of hovering above me. And I went back to that sculpture, the copper sculpture, thinking, okay, I want to do something with this, about this feeling of her being so close. And so I made a series of etchings. So I printed it so that it was that kind of nose to nose. But then I don't know if you can see, I'll just go to here. When you have a CT scan and you change the settings, you can see, like often when you're being scanned, you kind of cushioned, and they'll put something under your knees so it's more comfortable, and maybe put something under your neck so you're comfortable. And so often you see this kind of, something's revealed when you change those settings. And so I want to suggest this, that what's separating now my mother and me and these are the MRI scans of her brain that are kind of cut out from the paper. And something that I remember thinking a lot about now, and I think it's something that a lot of like carers live with, is this also the guilt that you feel, because at a certain point, as much as we wanted to be everything and do everything we could for our mother, we weren't able to. We were no longer able to care for her 100%. And she was being cared for by other people who we didn't know in this very vulnerable time. And so this is a sculpture where it's based on an MRI scan of my mother's brain, the one that proved her diagnosis, being held in a pair of anonymized hands. And this piece is actually in the exhibition Connections, which I'll talk about. So this is kind of relates to, like, so at the time that my mum was going through this, and I was also, you kind of surrounded by all these technologies, like increasingly like surrounded by AI technologies and all these like things that can do things so much better than we can do. And also something when I was with my mother, like we had so many portals to log into, so much paperwork to do. And it's so challenging when you're dealing with kind of a dementia diagnosis to be doing that. And then as part of my MSc, I really wanted to do a project which related to sort of this idea of like different parts of the brain having different functions. And I had made this attempt over months and months to take the scan of my brain and kind of try and map all the different functions to my brain. And I just couldn't do it. Like it was just really, really hard to be able to go through the brain and map it. And I had a chat with my supervisor, and he said, well, why don't you just use FreeSurfer? It will do it for you. It's like, oh, what's FreeSurfer? And so he showed me, and he downloaded it, and it's this automated software. You just upload So you can upload a high resolution MRI scan of your brain. It will just chug away for 24 hours and then spit out this incredible 3D map of your brain, 3D model, all parcellated with all the different areas, functions, calculated, and it's just like incredible. Like as a human, it would be just really, really hard to do it. And then I made this virtual reality artwork where this my MRI scan is on the right, and on the left is an anonymized brain, which is CT. That's kind of like I feel it's like more of a processing kind of data set. And so, and in that brain is there's a data log of the data processing. So seemingly like a conversation between a kind of fumbling human and then this highly intelligent processing machine that knows our brains much better than we could know them. So I'll show you. Hopefully we'll work over the connection. So when you're in the virtual reality, you're then able to sort of dissect these two brains, and you could pull my brain apart and you get all these labels about what the different parts of the brain are meant to be doing and what they're called. You can kind of see the difference a little bit between MRI and CT scanning here. Like MRI, which is images water content, is a much softer kind of scan, and CT, which images density, is a much harder scan. So just some of the aesthetic differences. And this is the piece that I just added listening to you talk, Jim. So I like this, working with MRI scan data and any kind of medical imaging data in virtual reality is really a big focus now, and it has been for the past 3 or 4 years. I'm part of quite a large research project, and one of the most recent pieces we did was called Your Data Body, and thinking about the ethics of working with like data of other people. It's something that I've done a lot in my career, but now as data can be aggregated and kind of this idea of anonymization is more and more debunked, it's something we really need to think about, and we've written papers about it, but we wanted to make it as an artwork, as kind of an experience. So there's a number of different scenes. In the first scene, the scene is only made with open access, anonymized data that anybody can download from the internet. The second scene is made from data that's been donated knowingly for the purpose of the project, so to make an artwork, which is kind of like the university recommended procedure of working with data. And then the final 3 scenes were made in collaboration with one of the people who donated a lot of data and who's also an artist. So this idea of combined authorship, that if you work with the data of others, then you work in collaboration with that person. And so one of the people who donated a lot, she's an artist called Liz Ingram, and her husband is a poet as well. And she donated something like 30 data sets, 30 scans, which are as part of her ongoing oncological care. And she's also had brain tumors that have been removed. And one of the works, and this was very much led by them, but one of the works that they made, they decided they wanted to be placed in this old falling down cabin that they have on part of their property. And they decided they wanted to place all her brain scans that she's had over the past 7 years into this cabin. And they wanted it to look like snow. And they also wanted his poem to be floating above Liz's scans. So I just feel like there's a really strong crossover between this work and your work, Jim. So I'm just going to play this. Okay, and then just quickly to finish up, I'm just going to talk about Connections exhibition. This has been a really long project. It started in the pandemic, got completely derailed, but we found our feet again. And it's just opened, as Mick said, in the Royal Alberta Museum last week. And it's called Connections, Bringing Neuroscience and Art Together. And it's an exhibition of nearly 60 artworks of scientific images, neuroscience images, and artworks by people with lived experience, artists, a really broad range of people. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it a bit more maybe in the Q&A, but I should say we're having a poetry reading as part of this as Connections in the new year. So hopefully maybe we can bring you over, Jim, for that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marilène. That was a truly fascinating talk. I just wanted to also confirm, is there some of the Connections curation that's also available online?
Yes, yeah, everything is on the website, and I'll put the URL in the chat if everybody wants to see it. Yeah.
That would be great. Yes, thank you.
Let's do that now. Yeah.
And also, yeah, thank you for sharing about your experiences with your mother's Lewy body dementia as a daughter and as a carer and as an artist. Both of your talks described so well this, like the beauty and, to use the title of Jim's book, like the terror of being able to visualize the brain so intimately and in so much detail, especially when there's like a pathology that radiates to other parts of the life. And we actually have a few questions about that dissonance. We have one for Jim and then one for Marilène. So maybe I can start with the question for Jim. And so that question is, in The King of Terrors, your poems collapse the spaces between the clinical and the personal, and also the displayed self, like through MRI imaging and through medical reports, and also the deeply private self. So our question is, how does poetry for you act as a means of bridging those spaces and creating those collapses?
It's a wonderful question, Rhiannon. I hope that I'm having some technical difficulties here with my internet. Some of the visual and some of the audio is a little slow, so I hope nothing's too slow on my end. I'm happy to repeat if if that's the case. But I would say that poetry is a wonderful form of literature for collapsing distance. The distances that you mention, the distances between emotion, between the self and the bodily. I think that it's an ideal art form. What drew me to poetry in the first place was how you could tell a story in a very compressed space. And this was before I went to school and did my MSc, and ended up becoming a scientist as well as a writer. So I would say that that gap is rendered almost invisible with poetry a little bit. Associative movement between words and with language breaks those gaps down and allows you to connect disparate what people might think of as disparate thoughts and feelings and even disciplines, so science and art. So I just think that the art form itself is really meant for that.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I'm really structuring that like non-linear progression. And kind of related to that, for Marilène, how do you approach bridging the space between the technical, systematic nature of bioimaging and the intimate, subjective nature of the self-identity in your research and curation work?
I was going to say it's very instinctive. Like you feel things, and in a space where maybe you think you shouldn't be feeling things, and so you amplify those feelings. Then it's more complicated. And then I say we're so immersed in technology, and we're kind of losing, like as everybody's saying it, we're kind of losing the human relationships. And so whenever I can, it's just to try and reframe how we understand technology in that way, rather than which is challenging because the technology is so seductive, so you can easily get carried away. But it's kind of like focusing more on how does it change our relationships? How does it change the way we understand each other and other people? And to always remember try and keep it through to the really kind of raw things in life.
I mean, I would add there that when we were talking about technology, I felt that, while I was ill, that technology really helped me get closer to what was happening inside of me and with me. And I actually felt like it was a way of connecting with myself, to have scans. I actually got one up on my phone here. I don't know if you can see. So here's you can see the tumor right in here, in my brain scan. Yeah. One of the old ones that I have.
Yeah. It's interesting with Liz and Byrne, who worked on that piece that I showed at the end. I think because these scans have been accumulating for like 7 or 8 years, and I think they'd found it hard as a couple to really talk about it and to work through it. But making this artwork really created a space where they could, feel comfortable with the scans and kind of like, again, it's like cliche, but reclaim them and make them more positive. That I think it changed a lot between them.
That's so amazing. And then actually, as you say that,
speaking of,
no, you go ahead, Jim.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I had a question for you, Marilène, if I can, speaking of scans, I was really taken with the MRI sculptures that you showed that you did in 2002, and I was wondering, because those were family scans, whether any of that imaging was useful when your mom was diagnosed.
Actually, that MRI scans can't really show anything to do with Lewy body dementia. My mum had MRI scans and it showed that it was normal, and that kind of showing that it was normal actually was then an indicator, okay, there's something more serious here, which is why she had to have that other kind of scan, that DAT scan, which was with the fluorescence and the tagging. So no, it wasn't, other than to show that it had been normal then. Yeah. But it's something interesting, like when I sort of talk to people, if they want, because I now at university, I now have ethics approval to acquire scans for artworks, and sort of, oh, sorry, Jim, I think you missed my answer.
It's not a problem at all. Just continue without me.
I was just saying, I'll just quickly repeat that actually my mum's kind of like all clear MRI scan from earlier didn't really help anything, because MRI does diagnose Lewy body dementia, and actually kind of a clear MRI scan was actually an indicator that there was probably something more serious, and that other kind of tests had to be done when it came to the Lewy body dementia. And yeah, which is why that scan, which we already knew something wasn't quite right, but that scan told us exactly what was happening. But I was saying that I now have, I'm able to scan now for creative purposes at the university. And so I can recruit volunteers to be scanned. And a lot of some people really want to be scanned, and some just don't want to be scanned. They just rather not know if there is something, and other people are interested to know if there's something. And actually, we worked with an artist who made a piece just about that fear of waiting for the scan results, and then when you do get the scan results, and if you get to see the images, you still don't really understand them. You don't have the vocabulary in order to be able to understand what they mean, and what does that then do to you. And then you sort of see something that doesn't look quite normal, and then you kind of obsess about that. I think that's something that we are all familiar with, especially now we get more access to our health records and Google and these things. You can quickly go down a very scary tunnel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thinking about this like very material process with the scans and like relating to the self, Jim, I'm just thinking about your all your work in small press and the kind of embodied labor that goes into that process. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about going through this experience of you talking about the scans helping you um, feel connected to what was going on, and then also being the very embodied process of publishing in small press.
Sure. I mean, it was an interesting experience for me, because there is this element of having no control over your outcome. I was really in the hands of other people who were, I was going to go to sleep and they were going to perform surgery, and that outcome had nothing to do with me. So I thought a lot about this idea of if you go to sleep on a table and you don't wake up, what this means to a person. And my conclusion was that it didn't really mean that much to me. But my connection to other people was and it was kind of what was important and what kept me going in a certain way. And I mean, I think that sounds obvious, but maybe not so obvious. If you're living your life as an apparently kind of healthy person, that other people needed me to wake up, maybe more than I did,
Mm.
and that there was a whole community of people that relied on me, and that I sort of was working for really motivated me to get better. And I was working the night before, and I woke up and I continued working. I didn't really take much of a break, and to me that was very comforting. I like to be useful, and it kept me going. So yeah, that community is incredibly important to me.
And you're incredibly important to that community. I always, the hour always flies by so quickly, and I always wish that there was more time, but we only have about 3 minutes left. And so we just want to give both Jim and Marilyn the chance, if you have any final reflections on the theme or one another's work, we just want to leave you just a few minutes.
Just thinking after what you just said, Jim, is I did a research paper on around the ethics of using data of others, and in our research we came across a paper about the Brain Initiative, which International Brain Initiative, which compares brain scanning studies across the world, and it was found that in more kind of Eastern countries that the idea of brain data or brain scan data was more familial, that doesn't belong to an individual, but that it belongs to a whole family and a community. And whereas kind of more in the West, we think more of like it belongs to that one person, that individual. But I think like from hearing you speak really in practice, it's much broader than that, isn't it? That it doesn't just affect the individual, it affects everybody around. And as you say, you had that kind of support, but also maybe pressure on you to get better.
Yeah, I mean, I really believe that too. I mean, we're a community of human beings. We don't work without each other, right? Just being but I've always pushed back on the idea of individual genius or individual accomplishment. I mean, everything we do it is supported and connected to others, and I believe that about medical data, and I think that your work really illustrates that very beautifully. And I was very moved by how many commonalities there are. You're primarily working in a visual language, but between what we do. And have always said I would love to, if I had my choice, I would have been a visual artist. I just don't have any talent.
Oh, it was so wonderful to hear from both of you today, Marilyn and Jim. Thank you so much for sharing your time and experiences and your work with us. I
Thank you.
feel so lucky to be here. And thank you to everyone for coming by. It's always such a nice audience in this room. And just a little update for Cross Pollinations, we will be taking a little break next month for December, and then we'll be kicking off the new year in January on the last Wednesday. And we will be featuring the poet Bara Haladik and their book for Metatron, New Infinity, which is on the autoimmune system. And yeah, we can't wait to see everyone there, and take care for the rest of the year. Thank you so much.